let's see whether we can get the basic stuff going. So in my talk, there isn't going to be a lot of technology firework. So I think I'm here, Linda, you correct me, because I've been using quite a lot of online clips in my teaching. I teach in economics in the School of Social Sciences, and my area is statistics, econometrics, a bit of maths this year. And I came to using online clips because I saw the Khan Academy. How many of you know what the Khan Academy is? So those of you who have kids studying maths, if you don't know what the Khan Academy is, Google it, okay? It's my first encounter with sort of online clips. And then sort of inspired by this, I learned a little bit about, all sorts of stuff using video technology, and I came across MOOCs. How many of you know what MOOCs are? Okay, everyone. Who of you has been a student on a MOOC? Okay, that's because you're being asked to do it. They're being brilliant. Okay, that's the first time I ever get that right. Then I don't have to. So I did a MOOC to actually learn a programming language, and that totally changed the way how I think about teaching, because all of a sudden it taught me you can teach without lectures. Okay, and that's really a quite transformational thought, and I'll talk about this a little bit more later. So if you want to see my outpourings, you can Google me on YouTube and you find my sort of examples of how I use online clips. Now what I'm going to do today is you will see a lot today on how to produce online clips, but I'm going to focus a little bit more on the why we should use online clips. Okay, so you're not going to learn any technical stuff from me. And I'm going to basically talk to you about two things. One sort of very specialized use, and it's to create flipped tutorials. And I'll explain you how I use and why I use clips in there. But that's sort of almost quite specialized thing. And the second point I'm going to talk to you is that using online clips was instrumental for me, as I already just mentioned, in combination with watching a MOOC, to sort of rethink initially what the place of lectures is in my teaching and my students' learning. And that sort of focused me or forced me to think about a much bigger picture. Okay, but I'll talk about that as we get there. So let me first talk a little bit about tutorials. Now, in my area, economics, these are sort of the sizes for tutorial classes or small classroom teachings. Okay, and now I stole this from the internet without any, giving anyone credit for this picture, which is possibly not a good thing, but here we go. And very often in my area, it ends up that these tutorials indeed tend to be teacher-focused. Okay, either TA or in third years or postgrads, it's the actual lecturers who give the tutorials. And this ends up, because in economics and statistics and econometrics, we often have, we want students to solve problems. So we give them, for tutorial questions, we give them questions, or we usually give them to students beforehand, hope that they study them, but they don't. And they come to tutorials, waiting. Our tutorial is the way how I get the right solution to these questions. Okay? And that's, of course, important. It's important that we give students, knowledge about what's the right way to tackle a certain problem. So they see, students and also staff often see them as solution delivery mechanisms. Now, of course, for that, they're damn expensive. Okay, having to have rooms, having to create timetables where everyone can meet at the same time. It's really not a good solution, or not an effective solution. Well, possibly ineffective, but is it efficient in the sense of cost efficient? Possibly not, right? Because I can do that. I can produce online clips easily to do that. So I'll tell you in a minute how we use online clips to perhaps create the space and the time in lectures, in tutorials, to have them a bit more student focused, okay? To have activities in tutorials that are much more student focused. So you can see there's a little group, there's another group, and they are talking, perhaps solving a problem. So how am I using in my course this online clips to achieve this, to achieve the transition from the previous picture to this picture. So here's what traditional tutorials in our area, that may always be different in areas where you come from, looks like. We publish questions to students, okay? Then they go away, they study, they try and solve the questions. Then they come to the tutorial and they're given the solutions, okay? And usually they're given the solutions because many students don't do the questions, okay, or get stuck, or and then, you know, so how many of you have done the questions? Okay, not okay, let me show you how it works. And then the TA goes through it, okay, and then hopefully afterwards there's more studying going on. Now, so the way what we want to achieve, of course, actually, let me go back. What often doesn't happen is the studying part, okay? Does anyone recognize this picture? Yeah? What is it?
Well, oh, sorry, I did recognise this picture of people not studying.
Oh, okay. So I googled yesterday what sort of television shows do teenagers watch this this year. It seems to be Skins. I don't know what it is. So there's a picture of Skins. But clearly you're all too old to fall into the same age category as my students. So this is what we want to achieve. It's a sort of flipping, okay, for tutorials. So students get questions. We encourage them to study, but we provide video solutions, okay? So a bit like in Khan Academy, usually just on a whiteboard written, you know, and you learn later today how to produce stuff like this. Then they come to the tutorial where, importantly, they get a new question set, unseen, not published beforehand, and they have to work in groups on this question set. And the TA just walks around and helps the groups to find the solutions. Solutions to these are not published, and then hopefully afterwards they go on to study. Of course, I fully well know that some students will just hop this step, okay? Students will not study, but most, and I know that from asking students and from looking at usage statistics, most students who come to tutorials also look at the clips beforehand. Okay, they may do that without doing the work beforehand, but they look at the clips, and then the new questions are sort of built on these questions and then provide practice. Okay, now is all honky-dory with this? Oh, sorry, wanted to say, is all honky-dory with this? The answer is no. Well, students love the clips. Students love anything you put, you know, anything that moves, they love. It's brilliant. But what they do not like is that they come to the tutorial and they have to do the work, okay? And it's not the TA which gives them solutions. Some bitterly complain, but a huge majority says, I wish the TA would give us more solutions, okay? And of course, they want solutions for everything. You know, I gave them solutions to the first set of questions, give them another set of questions without solutions, but they want solutions to that as well. If I gave them solution to that and published the third set of questions, they would want solutions to that as well. So, but we are not in the business to always giving to students what they want. We have to make our judgments of what we think is best for the learning process. Now that, of course, always targets not every individual students, because some students are different, but that's what we need to do. So that's how I use these clips in the framework of tutorials to make the classroom meetings more effective, okay? To make them more part of the learning process from students and not just a vehicle for students to get solutions which are then used later in their revision process. Now, perhaps let's move to lectures, right? Perhaps the sort of bigger point. Now, this is a picture of a lecture, and can you see how nicely snug the lecture sits on this throne? So what do I mean with this? Has any one of you had to take over a course from a colleague recently? So back here, you're nodding, is that right? Okay, so can you describe me what happened in terms of the transition process from your colleague to you?
I inherited notes. PowerPoint slides, and then I made my own slides, but didn't change the content substantially.
Okay, so I can't comment on the content because it may have been perfectly great content, but this is.
I created it actually. The there were some mistakes that I
Okay, so I'm sure, don't want to know who your colleague is. Okay, but the important thing here, and whenever I ask, this question could go wrong, but I always get the same question: how does the transition process go? I got the lecture notes from my colleague. Okay, and that's what I mean with the lecture sitting on the throne. The lecture is seen as the definition of the course. I just give you my lecture note, you know everything there is to know about my course. Perhaps there's some more tutorial questions or something, but the lecture defines the notes. And that's in here, in our head, and it's in the head of the students. And I'm arguing, and that came to me after, being a student on the MOOC, this is really, so I want to swipe the lecture off its snuggly throne, because I think if this is what we do, it's like teaching and learning with our handcuffs on. Okay, now, when I then sort of first, had radical thoughts of changing this, I got cold feet at one moment. I thought, okay, can I change this? And I went, for the first time in my life, to the University of Manchester's Manual of Academic Procedures. So it's not the most exciting read, but I wanted to check to make sure there isn't anything in there that says, all the material which you test students on has to be covered in the lecture. And indeed, you don't have to. If you want to go to the Manual of Academic Procedures and find it, in fact, I have an appendix to these slides if you don't believe me. It doesn't say that in the Manual of Academic Procedures. Okay, it's actually rather helpful, but I'm not going to look at it. So what I want to is, I don't want to teach with handcuffs on, and I don't want my students to learn with handcuffs on. So this is how I'm in the context now, not only of the lecture, I'm now thinking of our entire offering to students of learning opportunities, how I think about this. The lecture is still an incredibly useful tool, not least because it forces students to turn up 2 hours every week, meet their peers, and, at least for 2 hours, think about the course. But from this sort of traditional, view, and not view, sort of practice of how we practice and how students understand it, that all the content is delivered through the lecture. That's a caricature, of course, okay? There's always requirements of reading extra, but I think, students, if you ask students, if I understand everything in the lecture, I'll be fine. And mostly they will be fine, certainly in the practice in economics. What I want to do is, and what I've been practicing in the last few years, I want to distribute the content delivery around. Okay, not only in the lecture. I'm not saying I'm not delivering any content in the lecture. I'm still doing this, but I want to deliver some content before and some content after. Now, what I certainly don't want to do is see this as a temptation to squeeze more material in, because we all love what we teach, and we all think our students should be learning more of this. They should be learning more of econometrics, and what about this? Can I squeeze this in? So this is not about squeezing in more material. So really, I just couldn't figure it out how to do it in PowerPoint. This content delivery here should shrink. Okay, it should just be a smaller aspect. And what I want to do is, I want to create space in the lecture for active learning activities. Okay. Now, the educational literature in higher education is actually, I'm a statistician, okay, and an econometrician. We are after, in economics, we are after causal effects, okay? We are really chasing them hard. We are really trying to figure out if someone does that has a causal impact on something else. In educational research, that's really difficult. I hardly ever read any paper in the educational literature that meets sort of the statistical standards we as economists would apply to say they have proved a causal change from, this way of delivery of teaching to better outcomes. Really, really difficult. And there's good reasons. Randomized controlled trials are quite difficult to do. Perhaps we think they're more difficult than we should. But one of the few really well-established aspects is that if you engage your students actively, that has beneficial outcomes. Okay, so that's what I want to create. I want to create space and time in the lecture to do stuff like that. Now, to do that, I need to move content delivery out, and that could be all sorts of stuff. That could be online clips, and that's what I often do because they're quite conducive in maths and stats. But it could be, very well-designed readings, could be podcasts, could be whatever you can think about. Okay? Now, what just give you a little idea. I know that's not about the online clips per se. So what I do in terms of the active learning activities here is I'm currently teaching a maths course. Right? So I need to teach them how to find optima in a bivariate problem. So I'll tell them in the lecture one problem, and then there are two more problems. We'll just have the problem at the top of the slide, and then you say, okay, now, you guys work together, solve it. You guys work together, solve it. I walk around for 5 minutes, see where students get have problems, and then I go back to the, to the data protector. And if there are no problems, I just give the solution. And otherwise, if I realize there are problems, I'm a bit more detailed in certain points. Okay? Or in econometrics, I just use an entire hour to, very slowly walk through an applied example. Okay? The sort of stuff which typically before, because I had to cram in more content in the lecture, I had 5 minutes at the end, and I said, oh no, 5 more minutes. Okay, let's do quickly an example, and I would sort of rush through without having time for the subtleties and sort of the major insights that could arise from this example. Okay, so what I do in terms of then the type of clips I create is that I take out from the lecture tedious mathematical arguments. If there's something I wanted students to be able to prove certain things in our course, but really going through this in the lecture is rubbish. All right? So I just produce online clips and say, look guys, this is examinable. Now make that very clear. Okay? But look at it afterwards. I just tell you why we do it, but not how. All right? You need to learn that later. Sometimes, I publish worked past exam question solutions so students understand how I expect them to answer questions. So if I realize from tutorials or office hours there are common problems where my teaching just hasn't been clear enough, I can go back and talk and produce a little mini lecture. Or in my area we have a lot of software applications. We're using R, so sometimes there are sort of demonstrations like this. Okay, so this is how I use online clips to sort of rethink. They give me the opportunity, because it's sort of easy to move outsource content into before and after the lecture. And so that's how I use online clips here. Of course, very important, I said, it's in our heads and in the students' heads, the importance of the lecture. Lecture is still important, but for partly different reasons. But the most important thing is here that your students believe you, that your course works like this. Okay, so they can't just study with an attitude, oh, as long as I know everything from the lecture, I'm fine, because indeed here they will not be fine. Okay, and that's just then important that your Blackboard site is, my Blackboard site is very clearly structured like this. For every topic, there's a before lecture, lecture, after lecture section where I clearly say, before I expect you to do this, after I expect you to do this, and by the way, is this all exam relevant? You bet it is. Okay, that's all I had to say. I also have a list of, I actually forgot to bring handouts, but I'm sure you're publishing these slides later. And there's, from my experience of creating videos, a list of do's and don'ts. But that's more the how, not the why. Okay, so that will just be there for you.
Thank you, Ralf. Does anyone have any questions for Ralf, or shall we set them up for this session?
Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a question. So how would you differentiate between lecture and a workshop? Because it seems to be that you are following the same approach in both the workshop and the lecture. And the second question is, this can be applicable to sort of subjects that are more to do with economics, with finance, figures and numbers. But what about management courses, more of a management discursive type? How will this approach be applicable?
Okay. To your first question, yes, partly they look more similar now, tutorials and lectures. It's not a bad thing from my perspective. There's still a significant amount of content delivery in my lectures. Okay, it's just that my purpose. So it's not flipped lectures. Okay, or it's an element partly flipped. I don't care what you call them. Okay, it's just I just need a great space for some activity, for students to engage properly.
And what's the size of the cohort?
One course was 250, 300. Currently, I'm teaching to 120 students.
And you're able to move around because of the space?
I don't need to, in the lecture, I don't think I need to get to every student. Okay, so that's clearly a difference between a lecture and tutorial. I just want to move around students. Perhaps I can solve some issues, but it's mainly for me to learn where are students at with their problem. And I'm a statistician, we know we can take samples and learn from samples. So that's what I do, applied statistics in my lecture. To your second question, now, I cannot profess to tell you what will make sense for you, what sort of, but I encourage you to think about what sort of activities for students, where students are more than just consuming what you say. What sort of activities in your subject area do you think could be done in lectures? But it's the most difficult part of this. It's easy to outsource material and create online clips, podcasts and stuff. That's really easy. It's really difficult to think about activities that you can organize in a classroom. But I'm afraid I have no solutions for you.
Okay, great. Thanks, Ralf.
Okay, thank you.